In note 6.7, example 5, we are going to explore something called biorhythms. According to biorhythm theory, your body is governed by three independent sinusoidal functions, each with a different period. And you can look online, there are various biorhythm calculators, and there are also a number of secondary biorhythms as well. So, the three that we're going to focus on are the physical, emotional, and intellectual functions. So, according to the theory, the physical function has it controls various characteristics. So, if you're at a positive value, then on the physical cycle, you'll be feeling physically fit to work on projects requiring strength and endurance. If you're in the negative area, you'll have less energy. From the emotional function, if you're on the positive, you'll feel great creativity, lovingness, and warmth. You're more open in relationships. If you're on the negative side, you're inclined to feel withdrawn and less cooperative. Maybe you feel irritated and negative. On the intellectual side, if you're in the positive, you're all more intellectually responsive. You're open to accepting and understanding new ideas, theories, and approaches. If you're negative, you're more likely to have difficulty grasping new ideas and concepts. And I am not promoting biorhythm theory. I don't think it really has any value, but it's something of interest for this unit. So to understand these cycles, we are told that all three cycles begin at 0 at birth. Okay, and then they cycle forward from that point with the given period. So the physical function is 23 days, the emotional is 28, and the intellectual is 33. What's important to note that values, positive values above the midline or axis of oscillation are associated with good things, and beneath the midline are negative values, which we've talked about a little bit about what happens to you when you're in the negative portion of your cycles. But in addition, a critical day occurs when your biorhythm cycle crosses the midline or the axis of oscillation. So either on the ascent or descent. According to biorhythm theory, on critical days, performance in the affected cycles might be particularly poor. So these are the ones we really need to be concerned about. Okay, and these days, the maximum level is 100 or 100%. The minimum is negative 100 or negative 100%. If we scroll down, I have an example of what one of these biorhythm graphs look like. So I am showing here the three cycles. So the intellectual is in blue, and you can see it's cycling up and down. The emotional is in orange, and the physical is in green. This vertical line shows the current day, and the values on the physical cycle here are 98, so that's good. Emotional is 90, also relatively good. Intellectual is negative 28, which is not so great, but where the graphs crosses the midline, this would have been a very critical day on both the physical and emotional cycle. Now that we know a little bit about biorhythm theory, we're going to try to write the equations for Phoebe. And we're told that Phoebe is at a high point on all three cycles today. And this means she's at her highest value on the physical, emotional, and intellectual cycles. We're told to assume that the amplitude of each sinusoid is 100 units and that the sinusoidal axis or axis of oscillation runs along the x-axis. That's what the horizontal coordinate axis means. And so I am going to start sketching a little bit over here what these functions might look like. I'll draw in the maximum line at 100 and the minimum line at negative 100. We know the axis of oscillation is at 0, or y equals 0. And we know the three periods. So the physical cycle has a period of 23 days. So I'll put 23 on here. We know that today, which is time equals 0, is a maximum. And so back at 23 days for the physical cycle, we'll be back at a maximum. And then we'll go through the midline at a quarter of the way into the period, and we'll be at the minimum halfway into the period, and then back to the midline 3/4 of the way into the period. So the physical cycle will look something like this. I'll do the emotional cycle, do that in red. So the emotional cycle is 28 days. So let's say this is 28 days. We started a maximum, we ended a maximum with 28. Midway through, we're going to be at a minimum, so maybe somewhere about here. And then I will sketch in the cycle, something like that for the emotional cycle. And the intellectual cycle is 33 days. So say this is 33 days. It starts at a maximum. After 33 days, it'll be back at the maximum line. And midway between, it'll be at a minimum. And so the graph will look something like this. All right, now we have sketches for all 3 cycles. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to write the equations for each of the cycles. So the physical cycle, we know that the period is 23 days. And now we need to find the b value. So 2 pi over b, since 2 pi is the period for the parent function, is equal to 23. We'll solve this for b. Multiply both sides of the equation by b, so we'll have 2 pi is equal to 23b. And if I divide by 23, I get b is equal to 2 pi over 23 for the physical cycle. We know for all of these cycles that the amplitude is 100, right? For all of these, A is equal to 100. And there's no vertical shift because the axis of oscillation is at y equals 0. So D equals 0. And now we're ready to write the equation for the physical function. It'd be easiest to write it as a cosine because it starts at a maximum when time is 0. So as a cosine, there's no horizontal shift. So we can write this P is equal to 100, the amplitude, times the cosine of 2 pi over 23 t or x. I'll use x. That's the physical cycle. Let's do the emotional cycle next. So for the emotional cycle, the period is 28 days. So then we know that 28 is equal to 2 pi over b. We'll multiply both sides of the equation by b. So 28b equals 2 pi, and then we'll divide by 28. So b is equal to 2 pi over 28, which is equal to pi over 14. And again, it'll be easiest to write this as a cosine equation since we're starting at a maximum at time equals 0. So we can write this as E is equal to 100 cosine pi over 14 t. And finally, for the intellectual cycle, we'll write that one next. So the intellectual cycle, the period is 33 days. So we know that 2 pi over b is 33. We'll multiply both sides of the equation by b. So 2 pi is equal to 33b. And dividing by both sides of the equation by 33, we get b is equal to 2 pi over 33. Similarly to the previous functions, it starts at a maximum. So let's use cosine. So I is equal to 100 cosine 2 pi over 33 x or t. If we wanted to write these equations in terms of sine, each one of the functions is going to be shifted right by a quarter period. So for sine, they're all shifted right 1/4 period, whatever that period is, and they are reflected in the x-axis because they are decreasing as the graphs pass through the midline the first time. So let's go ahead. We can write equations for sine for each one of these. So I can write here P is going to be negative 100 sine. We'll factor out the b, 2 pi over 23, and then we'll have x minus a quarter period, which is 23/4. D is still 0. If I want to write the equation for the emotional cycle as a sine function, I could write that as E is equal to negative 100 sine of pi over 14 times t minus a quarter cycle is 7. So that's that. And for the intellectual cycle, if we want to write a sine equation, it'll be I is equal to negative 100 sine of 2 pi over 33 times t minus a quarter period is 33/4. For letter B, we're told Phoebe will be at her next intellectual high 33 days from now. So a full cycle on the intellectual cycle is 33 days. What will be the values of her emotional and physical functions on that day? So for these problems, we just have to substitute 33 in for time or x in those equations. So for the physical cycle, we'll have 100 cosine 2 pi over 23 times 33. And if you enter that into your calculator, you'll get negative 91.7. And for the emotional cycle, 33 days later, will be 100 cosine of pi over 14 times 33. And if you enter that into a calculator, you get 43.4. Letter C says, biorhythm theory says that the most dangerous time for a particular function is when it crosses the sinusoidal axis, or the midline. For each function, find the first positive time at which that function is most dangerous. Remember, sine and cosine functions have key points every quarter period. So if we look at our graphs, since we started at a maximum, the first time that each of the functions is going to cross the sinusoidal axis is 1/4 of a period from today. So the most dangerous time, so I'll write that down. So the most dangerous time is after 1/4 period. And we'll figure that out for each one of them. So for the physical cycle, it'll be the period over 4, which is 23 over 4 days. Similarly, for the emotional cycle, so emotional cycle, that'll be the period over 4, which is going to be 28 over 4, which is 7 days. And for the intellectual cycle, it'll also be the period divided by 4. In this case, the period is 33, so it'll be 33/4 days. Letter D says, figure out how long it will take before all 3 of Phoebe's functions are again simultaneously at a high point. So each one of these functions continues oscillating along with its period. So we want to know when we're back to a day when all 3 cycles are at their highest value. So this is actually a problem where we're going to try to find the least common multiple of the 3 periods. So we need to find the least common multiple of 23, 28, and 33. So I am going to factor each one of these. So 23 is prime. 28 can be factored as 7 times 2 times 2. And 33 can be factored as 11 times 3. So there are no common factors. So the least common multiple is just the product of these 3 values. So we're going to multiply 23 times 28 times 33, which turns out to be 21,252 days. And if you convert that to years, you'll find out that it is when you're 58 years and 82 days. So I guess you can say if it's a critical day when you're born, when you're 58 years and 82 days old, that will also be a critical day.